systemic racism as well as police brutality. We did get some insight into police brutality and understanding what that is, but for our viewers, could you explain what systemic racism truly means and why, there is such an outcry to end it right now?
Yeah. Well, systemic racism in a nutshell means that the decks are stacked against you based upon your appearance or your perceived appearance, which means that you are not treated by various systems, whether it's the educational system that has largely been failing Black and Latino boys and girls at their goal of education, whether it's the law enforcement system that is incarcerating and charging, in particular, Black men and Black women at a rate that is far greater than any other population. Whether it is the criminal justice system that often ends up convicting individuals, often unfairly, based upon their perceived appearance, at a rate that is not correct, nor is it fair. And so it is often not an instance of one individual alone acting unfairly, but it is a reminder that the system, particularly in a country like the US built upon slavery, has been unfair in particular to Black and African American folks for the last 400 years. And I think you're seeing folks coming out in the streets right now for 15 days saying that it needs to stop.
Yes, and let's talk about these protests and this outrage. We have seen a huge spectrum of these demonstrations, from peaceful protests all the way to riots and looting. We are in New York City. New York City has also been impacted massively by these protests. How do we sort of look at these protests and these demonstrations? And what do you say to people that are rioting or looting? Because sometimes it seems that they're taking away from the message.
Well, I want to be very clear that there were incidents of rioting and looting, which were very limited and which do nothing to advance the cause of wanting to value the lives of Black people in this country. I also want to note that those incidents were very limited and have not continued for the last several days. So I think it's very important to note that there certainly were incidents of individuals who decided to take advantage, but that was also, I think, a reflection of the pain economically that so many people are feeling in this moment. The uprisings that are happening right now are happening at a time of historic unemployment, felt even more deeply in Black and Latino communities across the country. You have a pandemic that has helped, or that has stopped hundreds of thousands of people, in some cases millions of people, from being able to work. And so when people are feeling pain, both economically as well as socially, you have a limited number of individuals who are not the norm, who are not the majority, who chose to be able to take action that was unlawful. But I think the vast majority, in fact, I know the vast majority of demonstrations have been peaceful. And indeed, the most violence that we have seen has been provoked by law enforcement officers.
Yes, for sure. The entire protest has been led by Black Lives Matter across the nation. They are the leading, nonprofit organization that has really advocated for Black community, but just, in general, all minority communities. My question to you is, what do you say to people that claim all lives matter? Because that's something that we've seen as a retaliation to the entire theme of Black Lives Matter, which just means, to really stop the systemic racism. But I would like your comments to that.
Yeah, I think that we have been shown time and time again that all lives in this society have not been shown to matter. That in particular, the lives of Black and Latino men and women have been shown to not matter. And the deck has been stacked against the lives and the safety of white, in particular, folks' lives and bodies being protected. There's a reason that the incarceration and the level of police violence that is directed against Black and Latino communities, but in particular Black communities, is far, far greater than any other number of incidents to being targeted to other communities and to white communities in particular. And so the system has been developed to protect the lives and bodies of white people. It has not been developed to protect the lives and bodies of Black folks in particular. And I also want to note that, we have seen any number of tragic outcomes from the global pandemic in particular. We have seen a rise in hate violence targeting East Asian and Asian American communities after the president has insisted on calling COVID-19 the China virus or the Wuhan virus. So the spreading of blame and the inciting of violence to advance a white supremacist agenda has not been solely focused on Black communities and Black individuals. It has certainly extended to Asian American communities and to immigrants in general.
What then is the change that is needed, Suman? I'm talking about, is this a change on legislature? Is this a government level change? I know certain states are currently banning chokeholds, and there is a whole call for police reform, but I'm trying to understand, in a system in which we're talking about ending systemic racism, something that's so deep rooted in our community, how do we even go about bringing that change?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Aditi. I think it's going to look different in different cities, right? In Minneapolis, right, the local police department has decided, as you said, to ban the use of chokeholds. The Minneapolis City Council has also voted overwhelmingly to essentially reimagine and defund the police department as it is currently being envisioned, because I think they have realized that that system is not serving all members of the community. In New York State just passed a law to repeal a very troubling law that banned and sealed the use and sharing of records that outlined which police officers have been accused and convicted of police brutality and police misconduct. And so there was no way for community-based organizations or even individuals to know which police officers in their communities were already seen as dangerous and suspect. Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, had almost a 20-year record of police brutality against many individuals. It seems to me that he was not someone that was well equipped to be able to keep his community safe from others, but perhaps from himself. And so I think in a lot of different places, it means reimagining and rethinking what it means for us to develop a police and law enforcement system and structure that is truly able to keep all of us safe.
Is defunding the real answer? Suman, I'm trying to understand how defunding would actually help the system, because the concerns are it could be dangerous for the society as well.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think that defunding doesn't, in some places it could mean decreasing the amount of funding for police and giving more funding to local civilian organizations that are able to help individuals and deal with substance abuse perhaps, or deal with domestic violence. In some communities, it could mean, giving more funding to organizations that are focused on police transparency. In New York City, we have an independent entity called the Citizens Complaint Review Board that for decades has been tasked with reviewing complaints against police in the vein of violence, brutality, and misconduct. I think that it looks different in different places, and I don't think that it will work for us to advance a one-size-fits-all definition of defunding the police. And I think in a lot of places, the proportion of the police and law enforcement budget comparative to so many other services that are key to help keep a community whole and safe has been not in balance. And so I think this is a time for us to reimagine both the set of priorities as well as the level of funding that is commensurate with helping to make sure that law enforcement are able to build close, real ties with the communities in which they are working and work with the community to really help keep people safe. Law enforcement leaders for the longest time, including but not limited to the former chief of police of Philadelphia that has seen any number of protests, have all spoken out and said the level of violence and the murder of George Floyd, as well as those of countless others, is not the way that police should be operating in their communities. And there needs to be a reevaluation and a gut check to say this is not what we should be seeing when it comes to the hands of police. And this has been occurring for so many decades.
Sure. My question to you in that would be, when you're looking at everything that's happening right now, Suman, and we're talking about the need for change, we're talking about a lot of cases that have just literally come out in the front, all saying something about police brutality. What have you felt about the president's response to this case, as well as how the White House administration is handling this? Do you think they are lacking, perhaps, or do you think they're doing their job right?
I continue to be disappointed at the response of the president as well as the White House with respect to the uprisings and the ways that the president, as well as his supporters in the White House, have continued to fan the flames of violence. When you have a sitting president who references the words of a brutal police chief from the 1970s who vowed, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, you have an individual who is not working to calm down a powder keg of a situation across the country. You have someone who is choosing explicitly to pit residents against each other, which is not a course of action or words that will do anything to help defuse the high emotions and sentiments that are coming across the country. What is clear to me is that this administration, both via its actions, its statements, as well as its policies, does not care at all about ending police brutality, about ending systemic racism, or really about the lives that have been lost. When you have the current president indicating that a peaceful protester who was 75 years old in Buffalo, New York, pushed himself to in turn sustain a critical injury at the hands of police, I see yet another incident of blaming the victim of a tragic, violent incident. And I know that our nation deserves better, and that our whole set of residents across the country and really the world also deserves better.
Simon, in the South Asian community, there is a sense of anti-Blackness, and apparently there is a lack of understanding of their own history of being a model minority. I think this is a good part in the interview for us to have a little discussion on that and your comments on that. How prevalent is this issue, and how important it is for us to right now discuss that there is anti-Blackness issue in the community, in which we have to educate and raise awareness so that we can understand that this issue just doesn't impact Black lives, it impacts all lives, all brown and Black communities.
I think this is a moment of deep reflection and a real opportunity for South Asians to be able to really understand, even from a historical perspective, the ways that South Asians have been pitted against very explicitly Black individuals and communities. I think it's important also for us to understand that we in our own community often hold very deep-seated feelings of anti-Blackness and are often very quick to distance ourselves from Black individuals and from Black communities, and that continues to play into the rules of an explicitly white supremacist agenda. White supremacists want South Asians to believe that we are slightly better than Black folks, but they will never consider us their equals. And the level of violence that has been aimed against South Asians and Blacks is not equal. The level of violence and the murders of Black individuals in this country does not so greatly exceeds the level of violence that has been engineered against South Asians. And yet at the same time, we do have instances where we have an understanding of how anti-Blackness manifests in violence against ourselves. We have, the incident a few years ago in Alabama, where an elderly South Asian man who was visiting from India was seen as Black by white local police officers, was not able to make himself understood to them, was brutalized by them, and in turn ended up paralyzed. So I think we need to have more introspection and wake-up calls in our own communities about our own sentiments and ideas around anti-Blackness, and how we need to disrupt those ideas and truly actually take a stand, not just for our lives, but actually for Black lives. You know, when India was on the precipice of its independence struggle, Black leaders from the US went to South Africa and then to India to build solidarity and to meet with Gandhi. And we need to have that reciprocity actually continue now for us to have an even greater force to really truly show up for the protection of Black lives across this country. Because, you know, as my friend Linda Sarsour and so many others say, we will only be free once our Black brothers and sisters are free. And I truly believe that. And I think the events of the last 2 months have only shown to reinforce that.
Yeah, I think it's important for the South Asian community to be an ally for the Black community to really take this word forward. My question to you then would be, how do we all do it without getting in the way of other people that are the leaders of this movement? How do we do our own part, and how can we make this change according to you?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a few different things. Number one is to have some of these often really hard conversations with our own families, with our mothers, with our fathers, with our aunties and uncles, and really to not just hear from them, but to also educate them on how what is happening right now is an opportunity for all of our voices to be heard in support of Black lives. I think it's really important that us as South Asians do not advance the idea or the hashtag that all lives matter. I think it's incredibly important for us to be on message and for us to follow the guidance of our Black brothers and sisters who are leading this moment, and to watch and listen. And finally, I think it's crucial for us to come out. It's crucial for us to be able to be out in the streets if we can, for us to amplify messages on social media, and for us to be there and present as we are seeking to support the leadership, the activism, and the organizing that is truly inspiring that we have seen on the part of, in particular, Black young men and women. I've been doing this work for more than 20 years, and I continue to be so inspired by the level of leadership and presence that we continue to see on the part of our young people who have truly, truly been leading this movement. You know, in the isolated incidents of looting that were beginning to take place, I saw any number of Black young men and women barricade themselves in front of stores and say, this is not what we're about. Please don't do this. We understand you're hurting, but this is not going to serve our message. And I think it's incredibly important for us to watch, listen, learn, and continue to bear witness and to come out to what we are seeing and the potential that we are seeing right now.
You know, the last point I'd like to discuss here with you, Suman, would be to understand the importance of voting then. You know, we in New York, we're coming up with our primaries on June 23rd, and nationwide primaries have already started. We're looking at Georgia today. How important do you think it is for us to advocate that voice, and that the voice is heard for these, justice reform, for these massive changes we're asking? What is the role of these elections according to you?
I think we are on the precipice this year of the opportunity to effect historic change. I think the events, in particular, just of the last 2 weeks, as well as of the last few years, have served to remind us all that is at stake. And for those of us who have the privilege of being able to vote, and it's not all of us, but for those who have the privilege of being able to vote, it is crucial, absolutely crucial, no matter where you live, no matter whether or not your state is seen as a battleground state or as a safe state. It is crucial to come out and voice your opinions, because I can tell you that every activist, every advocate, every organizer, every elected official, every police officer is looking to see if the change that we have seen in the streets for the last 2 weeks will continue to manifest at the ballot box, which in some ways unfairly, is one of the main ways that we can make change happen. You know, coming out into the streets is crucial, but it is not the way that we're going to be able to change laws and policies. We can change the conversation when we come out in the streets, but for us to effect lasting change and to continue to build momentum, we have to do so by voting at the ballot box. As they say, vote early and often.